Welcome back, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, you will explore the wise lessons that Buddhist teachers have loved for many years. These teachings are designed to calm busy minds and build deep inner peace. Before we start, feel free to share where you are listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. I have carefully chosen a collection of powerful Zen stories, each offering strong ideas that wake up your natural ability to let go of worry and stress. Whether your mind is all over the place or you have struggled before to find calmness, remember the Buddha's wise words. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. With our thoughts, we make the world. As we travel tonight through meetings between curious students and wise masters, you will notice something amazing beginning to happen. The heavy feeling of stress will gently lift from your shoulders. Your breathing will easily become deeper, and you will find yourself moving naturally toward a state of deep, healing quiet. Find comfort now. Allow yourself to totally give in to the quiet power of this moment. Take one focused breath with me. And as you breathe out, know that you have opened a door into timeless wisdom that has patiently waited for you for a long time. Now, let us begin with our first story. This old story is about the nature of true understanding and the journey beyond thinking with words. This is the sound of one hand. In the ancient halls of Kennen Temple, where golden light came through paper screens and the smell of incense floated through quiet hallways, there lived a master known as Mokurai, whose name meant silent thunder. Despite his scary reputation for wisdom, Mokurai had grown fond of a 12-year-old boy named Toyo, whose bright eyes and eager spirit reminded him of his own early days on the path. Each morning and evening, Toyo watched the older students walk seriously into Mokurai's private room for special lessons. These were the personal guidance sessions where masters gave puzzles to students. These confusing riddles were designed to tire out the thinking mind and open doors to direct understanding. Toyo's heart burned with curiosity about these mysterious teachings. "Master," Toyo said one day, bowing deeply, "I wish to receive instruction like the other students." Mokurai looked at the boy's serious face. "Wait a while," he said gently. "You are too young for such practices." But Toyo's determination was as steady as mountain stones. Day after day he returned with the same request until finally, Mokurai agreed with a small smile. That evening, little Toyo walked to the door of his master's room with great respect. He hit the brass gong to announce he was there, its sound echoing through the temple halls. 3 times he bowed outside the door before entering and taking his place before Mokurai in respectful silence. "You can hear the sound of 2 hands when they clap together," Mokurai said, his voice carrying the weight of hundreds of years of teaching. "No, show me the sound of 1 hand." Toyo bowed deeply and went back to his small room to think about this puzzle. As he sat by his window, the evening air carried the pretty voices of singers from the town below. Their songs floated up like silk ribbons on the breeze, and suddenly Toyo's face lit up. "I have it," he exclaimed. The next evening, when Mokurai again asked for the sound of 1 hand, young Toyo began to sing the melodies with careful attention to each note. "No, no," Mokurai said, shaking his head. "That will never do. That is not the sound of 1 hand. You have not got it at all." Thinking the music might be too distracting, Toyo moved his sleeping place to a quieter part of the temple. There, in deeper silence, he meditated again on the impossible question. Late one night, he heard water dripping steadily from the roof into a clay pot below. Each drop created a perfect sound in the darkness. "I have it," he thought with excitement. When he appeared before his teacher the next day, Toyo carefully copied the rhythm and tone of dripping water. "What is that?" Mokurai asked. "That is the sound of dripping water, but not the sound of 1 hand. Try again." Night after night, Toyo searched for the answer. He offered his master the sound of wind blowing through bamboo, but this was rejected. He presented the cry of an owl cutting through the mountain silence, but this too was refused. The chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves, the distant temple bells. None of these satisfied Mokurai's question. More than 10 times Toyo appeared before his teacher with different sounds. Each time he was turned away with gentle correction. For almost a year the boy thought about what the sound of 1 hand might be, his young mind fighting with the impossible riddle. Then one quiet evening, as cherry blossoms fell like snow outside his window, something changed in Toyo's understanding. He entered a meditation deeper than any he had known before. A stillness that went beyond all sounds, all ideas, all searching. In that deep silence, he found what he had been looking for. "I could collect no more sounds," he explained later to his master. "So I reached the soundless sound." Mokurai's eyes sparkled with understanding. Little Toyo had realized the sound of 1 hand. Buddha's wisdom reminds us peace comes from inside. Do not look for it outside. What comes from this story is a teaching about the nature of true understanding and the limits of thinking with words. The sound of 1 hand represents the direct experience of reality beyond the comparing mind that constantly seeks to grab and sort things. Why do we struggle so much with puzzles like the sound of 1 hand? Zen Buddhism shows that our normal mind works by comparing and contrasting. We understand hot by knowing cold, light by knowing darkness, sound by knowing silence. This comparing thinking serves us well in practical life. but it becomes a wall when we seek to understand the basic nature of reality. The deeper teaching here shows us that some truths cannot be grasped through thinking. They can only be directly experienced through what Zen calls don't know mind, a state of open awareness that doesn't immediately sort or label experience. Toyo's journey represents every student's path from searching with ideas to direct realization. Think about how often we approach life's deepest questions with the same plan Toyo first used. When faced with big questions, who am I? What is the meaning of life? How can I find peace? We usually look for answers in outside sources, collect information, and try to solve these mysteries through thinking. Yet, the deepest insights often arise not from gathering more ideas, but from letting go of our attachment to understanding through ideas altogether. Nothing is an accident in Toyo's journey. Each rejected answer served a purpose, slowly tiring out his thinking mind and preparing him for direct insight. The singer's music taught him that beauty alone is not truth. The dripping water showed him that natural sounds, while peaceful, are still within the world of comparing perception. Each failure was actually a step towards success, stripping away his need for outside sounds until only the soundless sound remained. Zen master Huangpo taught, the foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see. This points to the heart of Toyo's realization. He had to move beyond thinking about the sound of one hand to directly experiencing it. This shift from knowing through ideas to knowing through experience is at the center of all true spiritual realization. In our modern lives, we might recognize this pattern in moments when we have struggled with a problem through hard thinking only to have the solution appear suddenly when we let go of our mental effort. The answer to the sound of one hand is not a sound at all, but the awareness within which all sounds come and go. It is the consciousness that experiences, but is not limited by any specific experience. The Buddha said, "However many holy words you read, however many you speak, what good will they do you if you do not act upon them?" Toyo's story reminds us that spiritual understanding must move beyond book knowledge to direct realization. The sound of one hand cannot be learned from books or explained in words. It must be discovered through the direct experience of our own aware presence. This teaching has immediate importance for anyone seeking deeper meaning in life. Instead of constantly looking for outside approval or gathering more information, we can learn to rest in the awareness that watches all experience. This is not a lazy state, but an active presence that meets each moment with fresh openness rather than old ideas. Tonight, as you rest in the quiet of this moment, can you sense the awareness that experiences but is not limited by any specific experience? This is your own soundless sound. The consciousness that has been present through every moment of your life, watching all changes while remaining unchanged itself. As the Buddha taught, look within. You are the Buddha. The sound of one hand is not something strange or far away. It is the closest reality, your own awakened nature, always present, always available, waiting to be recognized in the silence between thoughts. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a story about the ultimate freedom that comes from rising above our connection to the physical body. This is the hot pyre. In a mountain monastery where morning mist held to ancient pine trees and the sound of temple bells echoed across valleys, there lived a remarkable Zen nun named Eshin. For over 60 years, she had walked the path of awakening with total dedication, her presence showing the deep peace that comes from a life fully given to truth. As her body grew weak with age, Eshin knew her time in this world was coming to an end. Rather than waiting helplessly for death to find her, Eshin chose to meet it with the same mindful purpose she had brought to every part of her practice. She called several monks to her side on a clear autumn morning when the air was cool and the leaves were turning gold. "Please gather wood in the courtyard," she told them with calm command. "Build a funeral fire." The monks looked at each other with confusion and worry. Their beloved teacher was still alive, still walking and speaking clearly. Why was she asking for such a thing? But Eshin's reputation for wisdom was famous, and they had learned to trust her guidance even when they couldn't understand it. Quietly, they collected dry wood and arranged it carefully in the monastery's central courtyard, creating a traditional funeral fire. When the preparation was complete, Eshin came out of her room wearing her best robes. Without waiting or ceremony, she walked to the center of the wooden pile and seated herself in the meditation position. Her back straight and her hands folded peacefully in her lap. Her face showed no sign of fear or doubt, only the calm look of someone who had found complete freedom from attachment. "Light the fire," she told the monks who stood frozen in amazement at her calmness. As the flames began to touch the edges of the wood, growing stronger with each passing moment, one of the younger monks could no longer hold back his worry. The sight of his respected teacher sitting calmly in the center of the growing fire was too much for him to understand. "Oh nun," he shouted above the crackling of the burning wood. "Is it hot in there?" Eshin turned her gaze toward the worried monk, and her eyes sparkled with the same teaching spirit that had guided countless students over the years. Even in this final moment, she remained a teacher. Such a matter would concern only a stupid person like yourself. She replied with gentle firmness, her voice carrying clearly despite the flames that now surrounded her completely. The fire grew higher, and Eshin passed away in perfect peace, leaving behind a teaching that would echo through the years. The Buddha once said, "The body is like an earthen pot, fragile and temporary, but the spirit within is indestructible." This ancient wisdom lights up the deep teaching hidden in Eshin's final act. She showed complete freedom from our most basic attachment, identifying with the physical body. Why do we find Eshin's story so challenging to our normal understanding? Zen Buddhism explains that most human suffering comes from our deep connection to temporary things. Our bodies, thoughts, emotions, and situations. We mistake these changing conditions for our true identity, creating endless worry about their unavoidable change. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding what Zen calls the deathless death. Eshin had realized through years of practice that her true nature was not the aging body that held her awareness, but the consciousness itself, timeless, formless, and untouched by physical change. From this view, death becomes not an ending, but a change like taking off worn-out clothes. Nothing is an accident in how this teaching comes to us. Eshin's answer to the monk's worry, calling him stupid for worrying about physical heat, wasn't mean but kind. She was pointing to the foolishness of identifying with temporary things while missing our eternal nature. The physical feeling of heat was completely unimportant to who she truly was. Think about how much of our daily worry revolves around threats to our temporary identities. We worry about aging, sickness, failure, rejection, or loss because we believe these temporary conditions define us. We spend huge energy protecting and keeping what Buddhist teaching calls the false self, the collection of physical feelings, memories, and mental habits we mistake for our true identity. Zen Master Banki taught, "You are perfect just as you are, and you could use a little improvement." This puzzle points to the same truth Eshin showed. Our essential nature is already complete and untouched by changing conditions. Yet we can grow greater recognition of this truth through practice. Eshin's lack of fear in the face of flames represents the ultimate result of spiritual practice. Complete freedom from identification with anything temporary. This doesn't mean becoming uncaring about physical comfort or safety in daily life, but rather holding these concerns lightly without the desperate attachment that creates suffering. Look deeply at your own experience. How much mental energy do you spend protecting your image, your comfort, your plans, your likes? These are all forms of the same basic attachment that Eshin had risen above. While we may not be called to her extreme example, we can practice letting go of our smaller attachments in everyday situations. When someone criticizes us, can we remain centered without defending our ego? When we experience physical discomfort, can we observe it without completely identifying with it? When our plans fall apart, can we adjust without feeling that our essential self has been threatened? The Buddha said, "Attachment is the root of suffering." Eshin's final teaching shows us what complete non-attachment looks like. She was so free from identification with her body that physical pain became as unimportant as a change in weather. Something happening in her awareness but not defining her experience. This level of realization may seem impossibly far from our normal consciousness. Yet it points to a freedom available in smaller ways throughout our daily lives. Every time we choose presence over reacting, acceptance over fighting, or love over fear, we touch the same deathless awareness that Eshin embodied so completely. Her story also reveals something profound about the nature of wisdom itself. True wisdom is not an intellectual understanding but a lived realization that transforms how we meet every experience. Eshin didn't just know intellectually that she was more than her body. She lived this truth so completely that even death became an opportunity for teaching. Tonight, as you notice the various feelings, thoughts, and emotions moving through your awareness, can you sense the unchanging consciousness that observes them all? This witness awareness present in comfort and discomfort, joy and sorrow, health and sickness is your own deathless nature. As the Buddha taught, all conditioned things are temporary. Work out your freedom with effort. Eshin's story reminds us that our deepest work is not protecting the temporary, but recognizing the eternal within ourselves. The awareness that remains untouched by any condition, including the ultimate condition of physical death. Now let us explore a Zen story about the nature of universal kindness and the ego's resistance to loving everyone. This is the farmer's exception. In the gentle hills of rural Japan, where rice fields stretched like green mirrors reflecting the sky and farmers worked in harmony with seasonal rhythms, there lived a simple farmer whose heart had been broken by loss. His beloved wife, the light of his life for 30 years, had passed away after a short illness, leaving him alone with his grief and memories. Seeking comfort in his sorrow, the farmer approached a priest known for his wisdom and kind heart. The priest lived in a small temple nestled among bamboo groves where the sound of wind through the leaves created a natural song of peace. "Honored teacher," the farmer said, bowing deeply, "my wife has died and my heart is heavy with sorrow. Would you please say prayers for her soul? I wish to ensure that she gains blessings from your prayers." The priest's eyes filled with understanding. He had seen many grieving hearts and knew the deep need to feel that love continues beyond death. Of course, he replied gently. It would be my honor to say prayers for your dear wife. For the next hour, the priest chanted ancient prayers in his musical voice, the sacred words floating through the temple like invisible light. The farmer listened with deep respect, feeling that each word carried his love across the line of death to his beloved. When the prayers were finished, the farmer looked up with questioning eyes. Wise one, do you think my wife will truly gain blessings from these prayers? The priest smiled with endless gentleness. Not only your wife, but all living beings will benefit from the saying of prayers. When we offer prayers with sincere hearts, the blessing naturally flows out to hug every living creature, every person, every animal, every being capable of suffering and joy. The farmer's forehead wrinkled as he thought about this. While the idea of helping everyone seemed generous, it also bothered him. If you say all living beings will benefit, he said slowly, then my wife may be very weak in the spirit world, and others might take advantage of her, getting the benefit that should rightfully be hers. Could you please say prayers just for her alone? The priest's expression remained patient and kind. Dear friend, this is the very heart of Buddhist teaching, to offer blessings and wish good things for every living being. True kindness knows no boundaries. When we pray for all beings, we join ourselves with the Buddha's own endless heart. The farmer nodded thoughtfully, appearing to accept this explanation. That is indeed a fine teaching, he said. I can see the wisdom in blessing all beings with merit. But then his face darkened slightly, and he leaned forward with a secret whisper. However, please make one small exception. I have a neighbor who has been rough and mean to me for years. He insults my farming ways, lets his animals eat my crops, and speaks badly of me in the village. Just leave him out from all those living beings when you pray. The priest remained silent for a long moment, understanding that this request revealed something deep about the human heart and its capacity for selective love. As the Buddha observed, hatred is never conquered by hatred. Hatred is only conquered by love. The deeper teaching here shows us how the ego creates exceptions to universal kindness, drawing circles around who deserves our love and kindness. Why do we find it so natural to make exceptions like the farmer? Zen Buddhism shows that our normal mind works through a basic split that divides the world into us and them, deserving and undeserving, friend and enemy. This dividing thinking feels natural because it served our ancestors' survival needs. But it becomes a spiritual wall when we seek to build real kindness. Nothing is an accident in how this story unfolds. The farmer's grief for his wife shows his capacity for deep love. Yet his anger toward his neighbor shows how that same heart can close when faced with someone who has caused him pain. This difference exists within all of us. We can love deeply and exclude freely, often in the same moment. Look deeply at your own experience of love and kindness. How easily do you extend kindness to family members versus strangers? How quickly does your heart close when someone treats you unfairly? The farmer's request to exclude his difficult neighbor represents a universal human habit, to withdraw our kindness from those who challenge us. Think about the subtle ways we make similar exceptions throughout our days. We feel sorry for victims of natural disasters, but judge those who make poor money decisions. We extend patience to children but get annoyed at slow, moving elderly people. We offer forgiveness to friends but withhold it from famous people whose politics we dislike. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, when another person makes you suffer, it is because he suffers deeply within himself and his suffering is spilling over. He does not need punishment, he needs help. This view transforms how we see the farmer's difficult neighbor. Perhaps his meanness comes from his own unhealed wounds, his own fear and pain showing up as anger. The Buddha said, if you truly loved yourself, you would never harm another. This reveals why true kindness must be for everyone rather than selective. When we exclude someone from our circle of care, we actually harm ourselves by keeping the very dividing thinking that creates suffering in the first place. The farmer's request also lights up something profound about the nature of blessings and spiritual benefit. In Buddhist understanding, genuine blessings cannot be kept or given selectively. It flows naturally from sincere practice, benefiting all beings whether we intend it or not, like the light of a candle that lights up everything around it without choosing. This teaching has immediate practical uses in our daily lives. Every time we catch ourselves making exceptions to our kindness, every time we find a reason to withhold kindness from someone who has hurt us, we can remember the farmer's story and ask ourselves, what would happen if I included this person in my circle of care? This doesn't mean becoming weak or failing to set proper boundaries with difficult people. Rather, it means keeping an inner stance of goodwill even toward those whose behavior we cannot accept. We can oppose harmful actions while still recognizing the humanity and worth of those who do them. The priest's patient answer to the farmer's request demonstrates skillful kindness. He doesn't lecture or shame the farmer for his very human desire to exclude his enemy. Instead, he lives the inclusive love he teaches, showing through his own example what universal kindness looks like in practice. Tonight, as you think about the relationships in your life, Can you notice where you have drawn boundaries around your kindness? Is there someone you have excluded from your circle of care because of past hurts or current fights? What would it feel like to include them in your silent well wishes? Not because they deserve it, but because universal love allows for no exceptions. As the Buddha taught, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. The farmer's story reminds us that our spiritual work is not to perfect others, but to perfect our own capacity for endless kindness. A love so big it has no exceptions, no exclusions, no fine print. Let us continue on our journey with a story about the difference between knowledge and wisdom, between teaching others and changing ourselves. This is a mother's advice. In the study halls of a famous monastery during the Tokugawa era, when learning and books grew throughout Japan, there lived a young Shingon master named Gyu. Smart and driven, he had become famous as one of the best language scholars of his time. Ancient books that confused other monks opened their secrets to his sharp mind, and his reputation for wisdom spread far beyond the monastery walls. Gyu was especially good at giving lectures to his fellow students. In the monastery's main hall, where scrolls of sacred texts lined the walls and afternoon light came through rice paper windows, he would speak with confidence and skill. His talks were master displays of knowledge, weaving together complex ideas with quotes from dozens of prayers. Other students would sit in total attention as Gyu showed his complete understanding of Buddhist rules. News of her son's school achievements eventually reached Gyu's old mother, who lived in a simple cottage in the mountains. She had raised him with great sacrifice, working tirelessly to ensure he could pursue his spiritual education. Now, hearing reports of his fame as a teacher and speaker, she felt she had to write him a letter. Her words came from a heart that had spent decades in quiet thought. A mother's wisdom earned through years of simple living and real practice. She took up her brush and wrote with careful strokes. My dear son, I do not think you became a follower of the Buddha because you desire to turn into a walking dictionary for others. There is no end to information and commentary, glory and honor. The mind that seeks recognition through knowledge is like a hungry ghost, never satisfied, no matter how much it eats. She paused, her worn hands steady as she continued. I wish you would stop this lecture business. Shut yourself up in a little temple in a far-off part of the mountains. Give your time to meditation and in this way attain true realization. The Buddha's teaching is not meant to impress others but to change oneself. When Gyu received his mother's letter, he felt the words pierce through his scholar's pride like arrows finding their mark. In the quiet of his study, surrounded by the very books and notes his mother was questioning, he began to understand that his brilliant lectures might actually be blocks to his own awakening. The Buddha taught, a man is not learned simply because he talks much. He who is patient, free from hatred and fear, is called learned. This teaching lies at the heart of the mother's wisdom. She understood that her son's brain power, while impressive, had become a replacement for the direct spiritual realization he originally sought. Why do we so easily confuse knowledge about spirituality with spiritual realization itself? Zen Buddhism explains that the thinking mind loves to collect information and ideas because this gives the ego a sense of achievement and identity. We can spend years studying sacred texts, memorizing teachings, and discussing ideas while never directly experiencing the truth these words point toward. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the difference between what Zen calls finger pointing at the moon and the moon itself. Gyu had become fascinated with the finger, the words, concepts, and mental structures of Buddhism while losing sight of the moon. They were meant to reveal direct awakening and freedom from suffering. Nothing is an accident in how this teaching came through Gyu's mother rather than another scholar master. Mothers see through fake behavior in ways that co-workers cannot. Her love for her son allowed her to see what his fans missed. That his chase for recognition was leading him away from rather than toward genuine realization. Look deeply at your own relationship with knowledge and wisdom. How often do we gather information about personal growth, spirituality, or mindfulness without actually practicing what we learn? We read books about meditation instead of meditating, go to classes on mindfulness without growing present moment awareness, or discuss enlightenment ideas without checking our own consciousness. The mother's advice to shut yourself up in a little temple represents the inward turn necessary for real spiritual growth. This doesn't necessarily mean physical loneliness, but rather a willingness to step back from outside approval and focus on inner change. It means choosing practice over performance, depth over breadth, being over knowing. Zen Master Dōgen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. Gyu's lecturing had become a way of studying Buddhist ideas without studying himself. His mother's wisdom turned him toward the harder work of self-examination and direct experience. Think about how this pattern shows up in modern life. We go to personal growth seminars and leave feeling inspired but unchanged. We share wisdom quotes on social media while struggling with the same internal fights. We give advice to others about problems we haven't solved in ourselves. Like Gyu, we can become walking dictionaries of insights that haven't entered our actual experience. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." This speaks to the quality versus quantity difference the mother was making. One moment of real realization is worth more than years of book commentary, because it actually changes our relationship to life, rather than simply adding to our mental collection of ideas. The mother's letter also reveals something deep about the nature of true teaching. The most powerful lessons often come from those who have lived wisdom rather than just studied it. Her simple, direct advice cut through all of Gyu's fancy book knowledge to address what really mattered, his spiritual growth. This story lights up why Zen emphasizes direct experience over book understanding. Reading about water doesn't quench thirst, and studying maps doesn't mean traveling. Similarly, learning about enlightenment is entirely different from the direct recognition of our own awakened nature. The mother's suggestion that Gyu sit in a far-off part of the mountains points to the value of being alone in spiritual growth. Away from the clapping and recognition that fed his ego, he could face himself more directly. In silence there is no audience to impress, no reputation to keep, only the raw honesty of facing our own mind. Tonight, as you consider your own spiritual journey, can you tell the difference between your book understanding and your lived wisdom? Are there teachings you can talk about well but haven't yet lived? What would change if you shifted your focus from learning more to practicing more deeply what you already know? As the Buddha taught, an ounce of practice is worth more than tons of preaching. Gyu's mother understood that her son's true calling was not to become a famous teacher, but to become truly awake. Her loving step turned him from the endless chase of knowledge toward the direct realization that change is not just understanding but being itself. Our next story reveals the deep wisdom that comes from strict daily practice and the mixing of spiritual rules into every part of life. This is Soyen Shaku's rules. At the start of the 20th century, when East first met West in the world of spiritual teaching, there lived a remarkable Zen master named Soyen Shaku. He held the special honor of being the first Zen teacher to bring the ancient wisdom of Buddhism to American soil. Crossing oceans not just physically but culturally, carrying timeless truths into a quickly changing world, Soyen Shaku was a man of striking differences that perfectly showed the Zen spirit. His presence showed both fierce strength and gentle kindness, qualities he captured in his own words. "My heart burns like fire, but my eyes are as cold as dead ashes." This was not the coldness of not caring, but the clarity of a mind unattached to results, watching the dance of life with perfect calmness while engaging it with strong commitment. Despite his deep realizations and growing fame as a teacher, Soyen Shaku understood that enlightenment without discipline is merely an idea. True awakening must be lived moment by moment, breath by breath through the countless small choices that make up each day. Therefore, he created a set of 10 rules that became the foundation of his daily practice. Each morning before dawn, while the world still slept in darkness, Soyen Shaku would light incense in his simple room and sit in meditation. This was not just a habit, but a daily promise to presence, a way of beginning each day by returning to the source of all awareness. He went to bed at the same hour each night, understanding that rhythm creates the space within which spiritual practice can grow. His relationship with food was equally strict, eating at regular times with careful control, never allowing himself to reach the point of complete fullness. This wasn't suffering for its own sake, but recognition that a body and mind kept slightly empty remain more alert and responsive to subtle spiritual insights. Perhaps most amazingly, Soyen Shaku kept perfect consistency in his interactions with others. He welcomed guests with the same centered presence he kept when alone. And when alone, he kept the same polite attention he offered to visitors. This meant that his spiritual practice wasn't separated into meditation times, but extended smoothly through every human meeting. His relationship with speech was equally mindful. He watched his words carefully, and whatever he said he practiced faithfully. This mixing of speech and action prevented the gap between ideals and reality that weakens so many spiritual seekers. When opportunities arose, he moved decidedly without waiting, yet always with careful thought. He had learned to act from wisdom rather than impulse, engaging life fully while keeping deep judgment. He refused to waste energy on regret about the past, instead keeping his attention focused on the future and the present moment's possibilities. Most beautifully, Soyen Shaku lived what he called the fearless attitude of a hero and the loving heart of a child. This perfect balance of courage and tenderness allowed him to meet life's challenges without defending himself while keeping an open, wonder-filled approach to each day's experiences. Even his relationship with sleep and waking reflected his spiritual understanding. Each night he went to bed as if entering his final sleep, releasing all attachment to results and giving in completely to rest. Each morning he left his bed instantly upon waking, casting aside the comfort of sleep like thrown-away shoes, ready to meet the new day with fresh energy and attention. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence then is not an act but a habit. What emerges from Soyen Shaku's story is the deep truth that spiritual realization is not a high point to be reached once but a way of living to be built daily through countless small practices. Why do we struggle to keep consistent spiritual practices? Zen Buddhism explains that the untrained mind seeks dramatic experiences and fast results, missing the changing power of simple repetition. We want enlightenment to be a mountain peak we climb once rather than a garden we tend daily. Yet every mature spiritual tradition emphasizes that sustained practice, not peak experiences, creates lasting change. Nothing is an accident in how Soyen Shaku built his rules around the most ordinary aspects of daily life: waking, eating, speaking, sleeping, and interacting with others. He understood that these normal activities, when performed with mindful attention, become doors to the sacred. True spiritual practice doesn't require dramatic rituals or strange techniques. It requires bringing complete presence to whatever we are already doing. The deeper teaching here shows us that discipline and freedom are not opposites but partners. Soyen Shaku's rules didn't limit his freedom. They created the stable base from which genuine freedom could grow. Like a jazz musician who practices scales daily in order to play freely, spiritual practitioners use discipline to create space for true expression. Think about how this applies to modern life. We often resist routine, seeing it as boring or limiting. Yet, Soyen Shaku's example reveals that conscious routine can become a form of moving meditation, turning ordinary activities into opportunities for awakening. Each time we eat with awareness, speak with honesty, or move mindfully between activities, we strengthen our capacity for presence. Look deeply at your own daily patterns. How much of your day is spent on autopilot, going through motions without genuine attention? Soyen Shaku's rules suggest that every moment offers an opportunity for practice. The way we wake up, the attention we bring to meals, the consistency of our sleep schedule, all become expressions of our spiritual promise. Zen Master Yunmen taught, "Every day is a good day." This doesn't mean every day is pleasant, but that every day offers opportunities for awakening. Soyen Shaku's rules created a frame for recognizing and using these opportunities. His practice wasn't separate from his life. It was the conscious living of his life. The mixing of fearless attitude and loving heart in Soyen Shaku's approach reveals something deep about mature spirituality. Spiritual practice doesn't make us soft or weak. Rather, it develops both the courage to meet life's challenges directly and the tenderness to respond with kindness. This combination of strength and gentleness appears in every true spiritual teacher. His approach to speech, watching what he said, and practicing what he spoke addresses one of our most common spiritual challenges. How often do we speak ideals we don't live or make promises we don't keep? Soyen Shaku's honesty between word and action prevented the internal conflict that weakens spiritual resolve. The Buddha said the path is not in the sky. The path is in the heart. Soyen Shaku's rules demonstrate that this path is walked through the most ordinary activities when they are performed with extraordinary presence. His daily routine became a continuous meditation, a way of remaining connected to awakened awareness throughout all activities. Tonight, as you consider your own daily rhythms, what would change if you approached routine activities as spiritual practice? Could your morning routine become a meditation? Could your interactions with others become opportunities for kindness? Could your relationship with food, sleep, and speech become expressions of mindful awareness? Soyen Shaku's example shows us that we don't need to wait for perfect conditions or special circumstances to deepen our spiritual practice. We can begin exactly where we are with whatever daily activities already fill our schedule. The path to awakening runs directly through the center of ordinary life, transformed by the quality of attention we bring to each moment. As the Buddha taught, drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise one gathering it little by little fills oneself with good. Soyen Shaku understood that enlightenment is not a sudden explosion, but a slow gathering of mindful moments, each small practice adding to the foundation of awakened living. His 10 rules became his daily way of filling the water pot of wisdom, one conscious choice at a time. Let us continue on our journey with a teaching about the dangerous gap between thinking understanding and lived experience. This is the story of the one-eyed monk and the silent debate. In ancient China, when traveling monks wandered from monastery to monastery seeking teachings and testing their understanding, a particular custom had developed among Zen groups. Before a wandering monk could receive a room for the night, he had to engage in what was called Dharma combat with either the head monk or a chosen representative. This wasn't physical fighting, but a contest of spiritual smarts and understanding where deep questions and confusing answers revealed the depth of each person's realization. At one famous monastery nestled in bamboo forests, a tired monk arrived as evening shadows began to lengthen across the courtyards. His robes were dusty from mountain paths, his straw sandals worn thin, but his eyes carried the alert brightness of someone genuinely seeking deeper understanding. The head monk, busy with evening duties, assigned his personal helper to conduct the traditional meeting. This helper had served the monastery faithfully for many years, though he possessed what others might consider a disadvantage. He had lost one eye in an accident during his youth. Despite this physical limit, or perhaps because of the clarity it had brought to his inner vision, he had developed deep insight into the Buddha's teachings. When the two monks met in the monastery's main hall, The traveling monk suggested something unusual. Let us engage in silent debate, he suggested, using his hands to show they would communicate through gestures alone rather than words. Sometimes the deepest truths go beyond language completely. The helper nodded agreement, and they began their wordless exchange. The traveler raised one finger toward the ceiling, holding it steady with a look of calm confidence. Without waiting, the helper responded by raising 2 fingers. The traveling monk, seeming pleased by this response, then raised 3 fingers. At this, the helper surprised him by making a tight fist and holding it firmly in the space between them. The traveling monk's confident look stumbled. For a moment he stared at the clenched fist, his face showing confusion and something approaching alarm. Then, without attempting any further gestures, he bowed quickly and left the hall. Soon afterward, he found the head monk and spoke with obvious respect and disappointment. "Wise sir, your representative is far too advanced for me. I must continue my journey rather than presume to stay in your monastery tonight." The head monk raised his eyebrows with interest. "Please tell me what happened in your exchange." "Well," the traveler explained earnestly, "I began by holding up one finger to show the Buddha, the awakened one who showed us the path to enlightenment. But your monk immediately responded with 2 fingers showing the Buddha and the teachings, both the teacher and the lessons he offered. So I raised 3 fingers to represent the complete 3 treasures: the Buddha, the teachings, and the community of students. But then he held up a clenched fist to show that all 3 are actually one united reality. His understanding is clearly beyond mine, so I must seek instruction elsewhere before I could be worthy of staying here." The head monk listened to this explanation with growing surprise, for he knew his helper's character well. As the traveling monk left into the evening darkness, the helper himself appeared, visibly upset and breathing hard from running. "Where is that rude rascal?" he demanded, his single eye blazing with anger. "I have been looking everywhere for him." The nerve of that man. I have never encountered such rudeness disguised as spiritual questions. What exactly happened? The head monk asked, genuinely curious now about what had happened between these 2 very different interpretations of the same event. "First," the helper explained, his voice rising with remembered offense, "he insulted me by holding up one finger to show that I had only one eye. Can you imagine? I thought we were engaging in spiritual talk, but he immediately drew attention to my physical limit. Determined to remain polite despite such rudeness, I held up 2 fingers to acknowledge that he was blessed with 2 eyes. I was trying to show that I bore him no bad feelings for his thoughtless comment." The helper paused to catch his breath, his upset increasing as he continued. But the scoundrel wasn't satisfied with that insult. Next, he held up 3 fingers to rub it in further, showing that between the 2 of us, there were only 3 eyes total. He was deliberately emphasizing our difference, making sure I couldn't forget my disability. That is when I had enough. I made a fist because I was about to hit him for his constant rudeness. But the coward saw what was coming and ran off before I could teach him proper manners. The head monk stood in stunned silence, thinking about this remarkable demonstration of how 2 people could participate in identical events while living in completely different realities. The Buddha taught, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." This deep truth reveals itself in the complete misunderstanding between our 2 monks, each of whom experienced the exact same gestures while living in entirely different interpretations of reality. Why do we so often project our own concerns, insecurities, and assumptions onto neutral situations? Zen Buddhism points to what it calls the 8 worldly winds: praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fame and shame. These mental forces create internal weather systems that color our view of everything around us. The helper's sensitivity about his missing eye created a filter through which every gesture became a personal attack. His past experiences of being judged or pitied for his appearance had created such a strong way of seeing that he couldn't perceive any other possible meaning in the traveler's hand signals. Similarly, the traveling monk's spiritual focus caused him to see deep teachings in what were actually expressions of hurt feelings and growing anger. His framework of seeking enlightened instruction made him interpret increasingly aggressive gestures as increasingly smart wisdom. Look deeply at your own patterns of interpretation. How often do your current worries, past hurts, or strong hopes cause you to read situations completely wrong? Perhaps someone's distracted behavior becomes evidence they don't like you when they are actually concerned about a family member's health. Maybe a colleague's helpful suggestion feels like criticism because you are insecure about your performance. This ancient wisdom lights up how our internal state creates our external experience. Both monks were sincere in their views, yet both were completely mistaken about what was actually happening. Neither was lying or deliberately misunderstanding. They were simply seeing through the lens of their own mental habits. The story points us toward a crucial question. How can we develop the capacity to see situations more clearly, less filtered through our personal concerns and interpretations? Zen practice offers several approaches to this challenge. First is what is called don't know mind. keeping openness to multiple meanings rather than immediately settling on the one that confirms our existing beliefs or fears. When someone acts in a way that triggers our interpretation, can we pause and consider other possible explanations? Second is mindfulness of our own emotional states. The helper might have noticed his rising sensitivity about his appearance and recognized how this was coloring his view. The traveler might have observed his eagerness to find profound teachings and questioned whether he was seeing wisdom where none existed. Zen Master Bankai taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine the very mind that creates these interpretations rather than constantly trying to figure out the correct interpretation of external events. The Buddha said, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased." This is a law eternal. If the helper had met the traveler's perceived insults with curiosity rather than defensiveness, if the traveler had questioned his assumptions about enlightened behavior, their encounter might have become a genuine teaching for both. Tonight, as you replay conversations and interactions from your day, can you notice how your own concerns and sensitivities might have shaped your interpretations? Can you sense the difference between what actually happened and the meaning your mind added to those events? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. By understanding how our internal weather creates our external storms, we discover the possibility of clear seeing that serves both wisdom and kindness. Let us now explore a story about acceptance, natural cycles, and what true wealth means. He approached the master with a request that seemed both generous and practical. "Master," he said, bowing respectfully while displaying his finest robes and jewelry, "I would like to hire you to write something deep that will encourage the wealth of my family for years to come. Something that my children can treasure and draw inspiration from long after I am gone. Money is no object. I simply want the most powerful blessing you can provide." The master listened quietly to this request, observing the merchant's obvious wealth and the sincere concern he felt for his family's future. After a moment of thought, he nodded his agreement and asked for a large piece of the finest paper. The merchant watched eagerly as the master prepared his brush and ink with ceremonial care. He expected fancy writing, perhaps ancient wisdom about gathering wealth or powerful sayings that would ensure his family's continued success in business and life. The master's reputation suggested that whatever he wrote would be both beautiful and deep. With simple, elegant strokes, the master wrote just 7 words. "Father dies, son dies, grandson dies." When the merchant read what had been written, his face turned red with anger and disbelief. This was not at all what he had expected or requested. "Master," he shouted, his voice rising with upset, "I asked you to write something that would bring happiness and wealth to my family for years. Instead, you give me this sad message about death. Why do you give me something so sad like this?" The master looked at him with calm, kind eyes and began to explain the deeper meaning behind what might appear to be a dark prediction. "Consider carefully what I have written," the master said gently. "If your son should die before you, this would bring unbearable sadness to your family. Parents are not meant to outlive their children. Such loss creates a wound that never fully heals. If your grandson should die before your son, this too would bring tremendous sorrow to your family and break the natural flow of life." The merchant began to listen more carefully, sensing there was something deeper in the master's words than he had initially understood. "But if your family continues year after year with each death happening in the natural order I have described, this represents the ideal course of life. This is the pattern that brings the least suffering and the greatest harmony. This natural order where each generation has time to live fully before passing responsibility to the next is true happiness and genuine wealth." As the Buddha taught, of all things change is the most sacred. This ancient wisdom lights up why accepting the natural order of life and death creates more genuine peace than any pile of material wealth ever could. Why do we fight against the basic reality that all things, including our own lives and those of our loved ones, are temporary? Zen Buddhism shows that much of our suffering comes from fighting against change rather than finding peace within its natural rhythms. The merchant's initial understanding of wealth was limited to material things, money, property, and power that could be passed down through years. But the master pointed to a deeper form of wealth, the blessing of a family that experiences life and death in harmony with natural order rather than in tragic breaking of it. Think about how different our relationship to death becomes when we see death not as failure or tragedy, but as the natural ending of a life fully lived. The master's blessing wasn't dark. It was recognition that the greatest gift we can wish for our families is that each generation has the opportunity to live completely before making way for the next. This teaching also reveals the limit of trying to control the future through gathering resources. The merchant wanted to ensure his family's wealth through outside means, but the master suggested that true wealth comes from accepting life's basic conditions rather than attempting to rise above them. In our modern context, we often measure family success by material legacy, the wealth we leave behind, the properties we pass down, the financial security we provide. But how often do we consider the emotional and spiritual legacy of a family that understands and accepts life's natural rhythms? The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are temporary. Strive on with effort." This teaching reminds us that even while we work hard to create good conditions for ourselves and our loved ones, the ultimate wealth comes from understanding and accepting the temporary nature of all achievements. Look deeply at your own hopes and fears for your family's future. How much energy goes toward trying to control outcomes that are ultimately beyond our control? What would it mean to wish for your loved ones not safety from life's natural processes, but wisdom and acceptance in meeting them? The Master's blessing contains a profound recognition. The alternative to natural order is not keeping things the same, but tragedy. By wishing for the normal sequence of generational change, he was wishing for the absence of the early deaths and broken cycles that create the deepest forms of suffering. Tonight, as you consider what you most hope for your family and loved ones, can you remember the Master's wisdom? Can you see that the greatest blessing might not be the avoidance of death, but the grace to experience it in harmony with natural order? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. The Master's 7 words brought the merchant face to face with the ultimate reality that no amount of wealth can change. Our participation in the endless cycle of birth, life, and death that characterizes all existence. True wealth lies not in escaping this cycle but in dancing gracefully within it. Now let us explore a story about the patient path to wisdom and the puzzle of urgent seeking. This is the teaching of the one-eyed student. In a peaceful valley surrounded by cherry trees, a young man had heard stories of a famous Zen master whose students achieved deep realization through hard practice. Filled with spiritual ambition and eager to change his life, the young seeker traveled many days to reach the master's monastery, his mind burning with determination to find enlightenment as quickly as possible. When he finally arrived, dusty from the road and bright with energy, he immediately sought a meeting with the master. The old teacher received him in a simple room looking over a garden where monks moved slowly among vegetables and flowers, their movements unhurried and smooth. "Master," the young man said, bowing earnestly, "I have come to study Zen with complete dedication. I am willing to work harder than anyone has ever worked before. Tell me, if I apply myself with absolute effort and unwavering work, how long will it take for me to find Zen?" The master sat quietly for a long moment, watching the young man's eager face, noting the tension in his shoulders and the urgent energy that came from his posture. Finally, he replied thoughtfully, 10 years. The student's eyes widened with surprise. 10 years seemed like such a long time when enlightenment felt so urgent, so necessary for his happiness. Surely with the right approach, the process could be faster. "But master," he said, leaning forward intently, "what if I work very, very hard and really apply myself to learn fast? What if I meditate longer than the other students, study more texts, practice more intensively? How long then?" The master considered this with the same careful attention, then replied calmly, "Well, 20 years. The young man's face showed his confusion and growing frustration. This made no sense at all. How could greater effort result in slower progress? Perhaps the master hadn't understood the depth of his commitment. "But master, I don't think you understand how serious I am about this," he said, his voice rising slightly with urgency. "What if I really, really work at it? What if I dedicate every waking moment to practice, sleep only when absolutely necessary, and push myself beyond all normal limits? Surely then I could achieve realization much faster. How long would it take then?" 30 years, the master replied without waiting. By now the student was completely confused and increasingly upset. Nothing the master said made sense according to his understanding of how learning worked. In every other area of life, music, martial arts, school, harder work produced faster results. Why should spiritual practice be different? "Master, I do not understand," he said, no longer able to hide his disappointment and confusion. "Each time that I say I will work harder, you say it will take me longer. This seems completely backwards. Why do you say that?" The master's expression became gentle and kind, like a father explaining something important to a beloved child who was old enough to understand. "When you have one eye on the goal, you only have one eye on the path," the master explained quietly. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. What emerges from this story is a deep teaching about the nature of spiritual progress and the puzzle of goal-oriented seeking. Why does intense goal focus actually slow our spiritual growth? Zen Buddhism reveals several ways that excessive focus on achievement creates blocks to realization. First is the problem of divided attention. When part of our consciousness is constantly measuring progress toward an imagined destination, we cannot fully inhabit the present moment practices that actually build awakening. Consider learning to play a musical instrument. If you spend half your practice time obsessing about when you will be good enough to perform publicly, that energy isn't available for the careful attention to finger placement, rhythm, and tone that develops skill. The music emerges through complete absorption in the present moment relationship between musician and instrument, not through anxious thinking toward future skill. Second is what Zen calls gaining mind, the subtle grasping that turns spiritual practice into a trade. When we practice meditation to get enlightenment, study texts to gather wisdom, or build kindness to become better people, we are approaching the path as customers rather than participants. This gaining mind creates a basic split between who we think we are now and who we imagine we need to become. The Buddha said, "What you are looking for is where you are looking from." This deep teaching points to the very heart of the Master's lesson. Zen is not something we get, but something we recognize. It is not a destination we reach, but the very awareness with which we walk the path. This ancient wisdom lights up why urgent spiritual seeking often becomes self-defeating. When we are frantically chasing enlightenment, we are operating from the belief that our present experience is somehow not good enough or incomplete. But Zen teaches that the seeking mind itself is the very awareness we are seeking to find. Look deeply at your own experience of learning and growth. Haven't your most deep insights often come when you weren't actively trying to have insights? Perhaps while walking in nature, washing dishes, or simply sitting quietly without a plan. These moments of natural awareness reveal what the Master was pointing toward. That wisdom emerges when we stop dividing our attention between here and there, now and then. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine our relationship to spiritual practice itself. Are we practicing to become someone different, or are we practicing to recognize who we already are? Are we walking the path to get somewhere else? Or are we discovering that the path itself is the destination? The student's mistake wasn't his desire for realization, but his assumption that it existed somewhere other than in his present moment experience. Each time he suggested working harder, he was actually moving further from the natural awareness that practice reveals. Like trying to catch your own shadow by running faster. The more urgently you chase it, the more it seems to run away. In Zen practice, we build what is called just sitting, meditation without gaining mind, without plan, without dividing attention between practice and goal. This doesn't mean we become lazy or lose our dedication. Instead, we bring wholehearted attention to each moment of practice, allowing insights to emerge naturally rather than forcing them through strong effort. Think about how this teaching might apply to other areas of your life. Perhaps in relationships where trying too hard to be loved often pushes others away, or in creative work where forcing ideas typically produces stiff results, while relaxed attention allows natural creativity to flow. Tonight, as you notice your mind racing toward imagined destinations, the person you want to become, the peace you want to find, the understanding you want to achieve, can you remember the Master's teaching? Can you gently return both eyes to the path, discovering that the journey itself contains everything you thought you were seeking at its end? Buddha spoke of this when he said there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. By walking the path with full attention, we discover that what we thought lay at its end was present in every step. Now let us explore a story about the power of belief and the destiny we create through faith itself. This is the tale of the general and the coin that revealed truth. A Japanese general faced an impossible situation. His army was greatly outnumbered by enemy forces. The land favored his opponents, and by every normal measure of military plan, the coming battle should result in crushing defeat. Yet something deep within him remained sure that victory was possible. Perhaps it was gut feeling, perhaps it was desperate hope. But he felt certain that his cause was right. And his troops, though fewer in number, possessed a fighting spirit that could overcome the odds. The problem was his soldiers. They could count as well as he could, and they had eyes to see the huge force arrayed against them. Fear moved through their ranks like a sickness. Doubt clouded their faces. Whispered conversations filled with bad feelings spread through the camp, and the general could sense that their spirit was crumbling before the battle had even begun. He knew that an army convinced of its own defeat would indeed be defeated, regardless of any other factors: skill, better weapons. Even number advantage means nothing when soldiers have already given up in their hearts. But an army that truly believed in its victory could accomplish seemingly impossible things through the sheer force of that belief. On the morning of the battle, as they marched toward their destiny, the general led his troops to a small religious shrine that stood beside the road. This was a place where countless warriors had stopped over the years to pray before facing uncertain fate. The general gathered his men around him and led them in earnest prayer, asking for divine blessing and protection in the coming fight. When the prayers were finished, the general reached into his pocket and took out a simple coin. He held it high so that every soldier could see it clearly. "My brothers," he called out, his voice carrying across the assembled ranks. "We have prayed, and now we will let heaven itself show our destiny. I will toss this coin into the air. If it lands heads, we are fated to win this battle. If it lands tails, we are destined to lose. Let us discover what the gods have decided for us." The soldiers pressed closer, their breathing shallow with excitement. Everything seemed to depend on this single moment. This one flip of metal spinning through the morning air. The general tossed the coin high, and every eye followed its path as it rose. hung suspended for an instant against the sky, then fell back down to earth. The coin landed and lay still in the dust. It was heads. A cheer erupted from the troops that could probably be heard for miles. Soldiers who had been grim and fearful moments before now laughed with joy and hugged each other with renewed confidence. The gods had spoken. Victory was sure. Their cause was blessed by heaven itself. Filled with this divine confidence, the soldiers attacked their enemies with such fierce determination and combined power that they achieved exactly what the coin had predicted. Against all odds, they won a big victory, beating forces much larger than their own and securing a win that would be remembered for years. After the battle, as the general walked among his celebrating troops, his lieutenant approached him with wonder in his eyes. "General," the lieutenant said, "what an incredible thing. The coin showed our true destiny, just as you said it would. Surely no human power can change what heaven has decided." "You are absolutely right," the general replied with a knowing smile. He reached into his pocket and took out the coin, holding it so his lieutenant could examine it closely. "No one can change destiny." The lieutenant looked at the coin and gasped. Both sides showed heads. The Buddha once said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think we become." Here we discover the profound truth that destiny is not something that happens to us, but something we create through the power of our own beliefs and expectations. Why do we so readily assume that fate is beyond our influence when our own minds play such a crucial role in shaping what happens? Zen Buddhism teaches that while we cannot control all external circumstances, we have tremendous power over the internal conditions that determine how we respond to whatever arises. The general understood something profound about human psychology and the nature of reality itself. He knew that his soldiers' belief in victory was more important than their number disadvantage. He recognized that confidence, determination, and fighting spirit could overcome greater numbers when those qualities were genuinely present. But here's the deeper teaching. The general didn't simply trick his troops through lying. He created the conditions that allowed their natural courage and strength to emerge. The soldiers possessed the ability to fight brilliantly all along. They simply needed to believe in themselves and their cause. Consider your own relationship with destiny and possibility. How often do you assume that outcomes are decided beforehand, that success or failure is beyond your influence? The general's two-headed coin represents the power we all possess to tip the scales in favor of positive outcomes through the quality of our engagement with life. This doesn't mean we can control everything through positive thinking, or that believing in something makes it automatically true. The soldiers still had to fight the battle. They still had to demonstrate actual skill and courage. But their belief in victory created the psychological conditions that allowed their best qualities to show. In Zen practice, we learn to work skillfully with both effort and surrender, both intention and acceptance. We recognize that while we cannot decide specific outcomes, we can profoundly influence the energy and attention we bring to any situation. This quality of engagement often determines whether we experience success or failure regardless of external circumstances. Zen Master Hong Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The general was wise enough to see that his soldiers' thoughts about the battle were more influential than their thoughts about their number disadvantage. He worked with the reality of psychology rather than fighting against it. Look deeply at the various challenges and opportunities in your own life. Where might you be carrying a tails mentality? Assuming defeat before you fully engaged, focusing on obstacles rather than possibilities, letting fear determine your level of effort. And where might you need to create your own two-headed coin? A practice or view that consistently turns you toward positive engagement regardless of circumstances. The Buddha taught, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This isn't magical thinking, but recognition of the creative power of consciousness itself. When we approach situations with genuine confidence, clarity, and commitment, we often discover abilities we didn't know we possessed. Tonight, as you consider the battles you are facing and the outcomes you are hoping for, can you find your own version of the general's wisdom? Can you create internal conditions that support your highest possibilities rather than your deepest fears? Can you recognize that while you cannot control destiny, you have profound influence over the beliefs and attitudes that shape how destiny unfolds through you? Buddha's wisdom reminds us thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The general's confidence lit the flame of belief in every soldier's heart. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is create the conditions that allow others and ourselves to discover the strength that was there all along. Let us now turn to a story about the nature of identity and the mystery of consciousness itself. This is the tale of Chuangzi and the butterfly. The ancient sage Chuangzi lived simply, spending his days in quiet thought of the natural world and the deeper mysteries of existence. He was known for his profound insights into the nature of reality and his ability to see beyond the surface appearances that convince most people they understand the world around them. One afternoon, after a morning of walking through bamboo groves and observing the play of light on water, Chuangzu lay down beneath a flowering tree to rest. The gentle warmth of the sun, the soft sound of wind through leaves, and the smell of spring flowers created the perfect conditions for deep relaxation. As he settled into this peaceful state, his consciousness gradually shifted from ordinary waking awareness into the mysterious realm of dreams. In his dream, something extraordinary happened. Chuangzu found himself transformed into a beautiful butterfly, his human form completely forgotten. He flew gracefully from flower to flower, his delicate wings catching the sunlight as he moved through a world of pure color and feeling. There was no memory of being a philosopher, no awareness of human concerns or book pursuits. He was simply and completely a butterfly, experiencing the world through compound eyes, flying by instinct, living entirely in the present moment of flight and discovery. The butterfly that was Chuangzu felt utterly free, unburdened by the heavy thoughts and complex worries that typically fill human consciousness. There was only the joy of movement, the sweetness of nectar, the warm touch of sun on delicate wings. This wasn't a dream about being a butterfly while knowing he was really a man. It was the complete experience of butterfly existence with no trace of human identity remaining. Then, as suddenly as the change had happened, Chuangzu woke up. He found himself lying beneath the tree, the afternoon sun having moved across the sky during his sleep. His human body felt solid and familiar, his philosopher's mind immediately active with questions and observations. The vivid dream began to fade as waking consciousness came back. But instead of simply dismissing the experience as an unusual dream, Chuangzu found himself puzzled by a profound question that challenged everything he thought he knew about identity and reality. He sat up slowly, still feeling the remaining sensation of flight, and pondered the meaning of what had just happened. Was I just now a man dreaming I was a butterfly? He wondered aloud. Or am I perhaps a butterfly now dreaming that I am a man? The question wasn't merely playful guessing. It pointed to something fundamental about the nature of consciousness and identity that most people never consider. If the experience of being a butterfly had felt completely real and true while it was happening, how could he be certain that his current experience of being human was any more real or permanent? Buddha's wisdom teaches us all conditioned existence is temporary. Work out your salvation with effort. This ancient teaching lights up the changing nature of identity and the importance of not clinging too tightly to any particular sense of self. Why do we assume that our current state of consciousness represents the ultimate reality? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to take our present experience as fixed and absolute, when in fact all states of consciousness, waking, dreaming, sleeping, are temporary and constantly changing things appearing in the vast space of awareness. Chuangzu's question challenges our basic assumptions about who and what we are. During the dream, the butterfly identity felt completely true and real. Upon waking, the human identity seems equally true and real. But which one represents his true nature? Or is perhaps the question itself based on a false idea? Consider your own experience of identity throughout different states of consciousness. Are you the same you when you are dreaming as when you are awake? What about when you are deeply absorbed in an activity or in deep meditation or in moments of creative flow when self-consciousness disappears entirely? Which of these states represents your real identity? In Zen practice, we explore the possibility that all these different identities are simply temporary appearances in consciousness, like waves on the ocean or clouds in the sky. The waves are real, but they are not separate from the ocean. The clouds are real, but they are not separate from the sky. Similarly, all our various identities and experiences are real, but they are not separate from the underlying awareness in which they appear. The butterfly dream reveals something profound about the nature of change and possibility. If Chuangzu could completely become a butterfly in his dream consciousness, what does that suggest about the fixed boundaries we imagine exist around our identity? How solid are the limits we place on ourselves based on our current circumstances or self-concept? Zen master Dōgen taught, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. Chuangzu's experience points to this same teaching. The more deeply we investigate the nature of selfhood, the more we discover that our fixed ideas about identity begin to dissolve. The Buddha said, "Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form." The man and the butterfly are both real and both empty of permanent, independent existence. They are temporary formations in the field of consciousness, each authentic while present, each naturally dissolving to make way for whatever comes next. Look deeply at your own sense of identity. How much of who you think you are is based on roles, memories, and ideas that are actually quite fluid and changeable? What would remain if you let go of your attachment to being any particular type of person? Tonight, as you move between waking consciousness and the dream state, can you remember Chuangzu's profound question? Can you hold your identity lightly, recognizing that whether you are experiencing yourself as human or butterfly, worker or dreamer, the awareness in which all these experiences arise remains constant and free? As the Buddha observed, everything is temporary. Strive on with awareness. The man dreams of being a butterfly. The butterfly dreams of being a man. But the dreaming itself, the pure capacity for experience, remains as vast and free as the sky, untouched by whatever temporary forms dance within it. Let us now turn to a tale about the thin boundary between heaven and hell within our own hearts. This is the story of the samurai and the gates. In feudal Japan, a battle-hardened warrior named Nobushige sought out the famous Zen master Hakuin. The samurai's armor bore the scars of countless fights, and his eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen too much violence. He approached the master's simple dwelling with a question that had been burning in his mind since his last campaign. "Master Hakuin," Nobushige said, bowing stiffly in his heavy armor, "I have spent my life fighting for my lord, facing death countless times. Tell me truthfully, is there really a paradise and a hell awaiting us after death?" Hakuin looked up from his tea, studying the warrior with piercing eyes. "Who are you to ask such a question?" he asked calmly. "I am a samurai," Nobushige replied with pride, straightening his shoulders. "I serve my lord with honor and have never retreated from battle." Hakuin's expression suddenly shifted to one of scorn. "You, a soldier?" he exclaimed with a rude laugh. "What kind of ruler would have you as his guard? Look at yourself. Your face looks like that of a common beggar, weathered and crude. How could someone so lowly claim to be a protector of nobility?" The words struck Nobushige like physical blows. His face turned red with anger and his hand naturally moved to the handle of his sword. The insult to his honor was unbearable. "So you have a sword?" Hakuin continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your weapon is probably much too dull to cut off my head. I doubt you could slice through a paper screen, let alone defend anyone of importance." Unable to contain his rage any longer, Nobushige began to draw his sword, the steel singing as it emerged from its holder. His entire body shook with fury. His vision narrowed to focus solely on this rude monk who dared to question his honor. At that exact moment, as the blade caught the afternoon light, Hakuin spoke with sudden clarity. "Here, open the gates of hell." The words pierced through Nobushige's rage like an arrow finding its target. In that instant, he saw himself clearly consumed by anger, ready to kill over wounded pride. His mind clouded by fury. He understood that hell was not some distant place, but the very state he lived in that moment. The samurai's hand froze on his sword as recognition dawned across his face. Slowly, with great respect, Nobushige put away his sword and bowed deeply before the master. His anger transformed into deep thanks. "Here, open the gates of paradise," Hakuin said gently, his voice now filled with kindness. Buddha's wisdom reminds us hatred does not cease by hatred but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is a startling truth about the map of our inner world. Heaven and hell are not distant destinations but present moment experiences we create through the quality of our consciousness. Why do we so easily find ourselves at the gates of hell? Zen Buddhism points to the three poisons that cloud our minds: greed, hatred, and confusion. When Nobushige's pride was wounded, hatred arose instantly, transforming a peaceful afternoon into a world of suffering. His entire reality shifted from curiosity about the afterlife to murderous rage in mere moments. The deeper teaching here shows us that we carry within ourselves the capacity for both states. Paradise and hell are not places we go to after death. They are experiences we live in while alive. Each moment offers us the choice between the hell of reacting and the paradise of awareness. Think about how often throughout your day similar changes occur. A mean email arrives and suddenly your peaceful morning becomes a world of worry and anger. Someone cuts you off in traffic and the openness of your drive shrinks into a tight knot of irritation. A thoughtless comment from a colleague and your happiness dissolves into hurt feelings and defensive thoughts. In Zen practice, we build the capacity to recognize these moments of change. Like Nobushige drawing his sword, we learn to catch ourselves at the very moment we are about to enter hell through our reactions. This recognition itself becomes the key that opens the gates of paradise. Zen Master Wang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." When we are caught in reacting, we are rejecting the present moment. The Master's teaching, the opportunity for awakening in favor of our thoughts about how things should be. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Hakuin's apparent insults were not cruelty, but kindness in disguise. By creating Nobushige's anger so skillfully, he showed the warrior exactly what he needed to see. That hell is a state of mind we enter through our own choices. This teaching invites us to examine our own triggers. What words or situations instantly transport us to hell? Perhaps it is feeling unappreciated at work, being misunderstood by family, or facing unexpected challenges. Each of these experiences offers the same choice Nobushige faced. Will we draw our sword or recognize the teaching tonight? As you notice irritation arising in response to some frustration, can you remember Hakuin's lesson? Can you recognize the moment when you are about to enter hell through your reactions and instead choose the paradise of awareness? As the Buddha taught, what we think we become. In each moment, we are either opening the gates of hell through unconscious reacting or opening the gates of paradise through mindful presence. Our next story reveals how freedom comes not from achieving something new, but from recognizing what was never born and can never die. This is the teaching of freedom from birth and death. In a quiet monastery garden where cherry blossoms floated on the spring breeze, a dedicated student named Goshu approached the wise Zen master Yu. For years, Goshu had been practicing meditation, studying text, and following all the prescribed methods of spiritual growth. Yet, despite his sincere efforts, he felt no closer to the enlightenment he desperately sought. Goshu bowed respectfully before his teacher, his face showing the strain of prolonged spiritual seeking. Master, I have been studying Zen for many years, following every instruction, sitting in meditation daily, reading the ancient texts, but I have not yet succeeded. I feel as lost as when I began. Please give me some guidance. What am I missing? What more must I do? You looked at his earnest student with kindness, seeing the weight of spiritual ambition that had become a burden rather than a path to freedom. He understood that Goshu's very effort to achieve enlightenment had become the obstacle to recognizing his natural awakeness. There is no secret trick to Zen study, you said simply. It is just a matter of freedom from birth and death. Goshu's forehead wrinkled with confusion. This answer seemed to make his quest even more hard. Master, how does one pass through birth and death to freedom? That sounds like the most difficult task of all. If I cannot even quiet my mind for a few minutes, how can I rise above birth and death? Yu's eyes brightened, and he raised his voice with sudden strength. Your every passing thought is birth and death. At these words, something shifted dramatically in Goshu's understanding. Like a veil suddenly lifted, he saw that what he had been seeking as some future goal was actually the very nature of his present experience. The constant coming and going of thoughts, sensations, and emotions. This endless flow was not something to escape, but the very freedom he had been pursuing. Goshu went into happiness, feeling as if he had put down a heavy burden he didn't even realize he had been carrying. The relief was deep and immediate. All his years of struggling to become something special dissolved into the recognition that he had never been anything other than the aware space in which all experience appears and disappears. As the Buddha observed, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. What emerges from this story is the recognition that we suffer not because we lack something, but because we don't recognize the freedom that is our basic nature. Why do we carry the heavy burden of spiritual becoming? Zen Buddhism points to our identification with the content of consciousness rather than consciousness itself. We mistake ourselves for the stream of thoughts, emotions and sensations instead of recognizing ourselves as the aware space in which this stream flows. Every thought that arises is born. Every thought that fades away dies. Every emotion emerges from nowhere and dissolves back into nowhere. Every sensation appears and disappears. This constant birth and death happening in awareness is not a problem to solve, but the very movement of life itself. The deeper understanding here reveals that what we call birth and death are simply names we give to the natural flowing of experience. When we identify with the flow, we suffer the worry of constant change. When we recognize ourselves as the awareness in which the flow appears, we discover unshakable peace. Zen Master Hongpo taught, your everyday mind. That is the way. This points to the extraordinary fact that the enlightenment we seek is not hidden in special states, but in the ordinary awareness that knows every state. The same awareness that knows anxiety also knows peace. The same awareness that knows confusion also knows clarity. The Buddha said in the sky there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. Our spiritual seeking often creates the very problem it attempts to solve by imagining that some states of consciousness are spiritual while others are mundane. Consider how much energy you invest in trying to have better thoughts, more peaceful emotions, or more pleasant experiences. Each effort to improve the content of consciousness reinforces the belief that you are that content rather than the awareness that witnesses it all with equal presence. In Japanese Zen, there is a teaching called just sitting. This practice involves recognizing that the sitting itself is enlightenment rather than a method to achieve enlightenment. Similarly, your current awareness exactly as it is the freedom you seek rather than a stepping stone to freedom. Tonight, as thoughts arise and pass away in your awareness, can you recognize the birth and death that you pointed to? Can you see that you are not the thoughts that come and go, but the unchanging awareness in which they appear? As the Buddha taught, all conditioned things are temporary. Work out your salvation with effort. The salvation is not in perfecting the conditioned, but in recognizing the free awareness that you already are. Let us now turn to a tale about the nature of faith and self-doubt. This is the story of the wishing tree. A poor man walked slowly through a thick forest. His shoulders heavy with worry, bills unpaid, relationships strained, dreams put off. Each step seemed to echo with the weight of his many troubles. The trees above filtered the sunlight into gentle patterns on the forest floor, but he noticed none of this beauty. His mind churned endlessly through his problems, each thought leading to another worry, another reason why his life felt so difficult. Tired from walking and thinking, He stopped to rest against what appeared to be an ordinary tree. Its trunk was wide and welcoming, its bark smooth against his back. As he leaned there, catching his breath, he realized how thirsty he had become. "I wish I had something to drink," he whispered to himself. Instantly, as if appearing from thin air, a cup of cool, clear water appeared in his hand. He stared at it in disbelief, turning the cup this way and that, examining it for some trick. The water looked pure, inviting carefully. He brought it to his lips and drank. It was the most refreshing water he had ever tasted, cool and sweet, exactly what his dry throat needed. "That was strange," he said aloud, but his stomach chose that moment to growl with hunger. Almost without thinking, he wished for food. A simple but healthy meal appeared before him on a wooden plate. Fresh bread, ripe fruit, and vegetables that looked as if they had just been picked. The smell made his mouth water. He ate slowly, marveling at each bite. "My wishes are being granted," he whispered in amazement. The realization sent a thrill through his entire body. "Well then," he said with growing excitement, "I wish for a beautiful home of my own." Before his eyes, in the meadow just beyond the tree, a magnificent house appeared. It was everything he had ever dreamed of. Big rooms filled with light, comfortable furniture, gardens blooming with flowers. His heart raced with joy as he stood and approached his new home. "If I have such a house," he reasoned, "I will need help to maintain it." He wished for servants, and immediately several kind-faced people appeared, bowing respectfully and asking how they might serve him. The man laughed with delight, hardly believing his incredible fortune. And what good is a beautiful home without someone special to share it with? He wondered aloud. He wished for a beautiful, loving, intelligent woman to be his companion. A radiant woman appeared beside him, her eyes warm with affection, her smile gentle and knowing. But as she took his hand, something shifted in the man's mind. The logical voice that had whispered doubts throughout his life suddenly grew louder. "Wait a minute," he said, stepping back from the woman. "This is ridiculous. I am not this lucky. Things like this don't happen to people like me. This can't be real." As the words left his mouth, everything began to fade. The woman's loving smile dissolved first, then the servants, then the beautiful house, and finally even the simple meal he had enjoyed. He found himself alone again, leaning against what now seemed like an ordinary tree with nothing but his original troubles for company. He shook his head knowingly. "I knew it," he mumbled and walked away through the forest, his mind immediately returning to the familiar patterns of worry and complaint that had occupied him before. Buddha's wisdom reminds us we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the creative power of belief and the self-sabotaging nature of doubt. Why do we so readily dismiss the good that comes into our lives? Zen Buddhism points to a deeply ingrained pattern in the human mind. The tendency to trust our limitations more than our possibilities. We become so familiar with struggle, so identified with our problems that plenty feels foreign, even threatening to our sense of self. Consider how often throughout your day you might receive unexpected kindness, notice surprising beauty, or encounter opportunities that could transform your circumstances. How quickly do you dismiss these gifts as coincidence, luck, or too good to be true? This automatic doubt often causes us to literally walk away from the very blessings we have been seeking. The wishing tree represents the responsive universe that Zen teaches us about, reality that mirrors back our deepest beliefs about what we deserve and what is possible. When we approach life with trust and openness, we often discover resources and opportunities that were always available but previously invisible to us. When we approach with distrust and self-doubt, these same possibilities seem to vanish. The man in the story had access to everything he needed. But his conditioning told him that someone like him couldn't possibly be worthy of such gifts. His belief in his own limitations became more powerful than the evidence of his senses. This is the tragedy of self-doubt. It causes us to abandon the very solutions to our problems. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the balance between accepting our inherent worthiness while remaining open to growth. The man under the tree couldn't hold both truths simultaneously, that he was worthy of good things and that positive change was possible in his life. In our modern context, we encounter wishing trees constantly. The colleague who offers genuine friendship, but we assume they have hidden motives. The job opportunity that seems perfect, but we convince ourselves we are not qualified. The romantic relationship that feels too good to be true, so we sabotage it before it can disappoint us. Each time we choose familiar limitation over unfamiliar possibility, we walk away from our own wishing tree. The Buddha taught, doubt everything, find your own light. But there is a crucial distinction between the doubt that leads to wisdom and the doubt that leads to defeat. Wise doubt questions assumptions and seeks truth. Self-defeating doubt assumes the worst about ourselves and our possibilities, then treats these assumptions as facts. Zen practice invites us to notice when we are dismissing good fortune, plenty, or love simply because it doesn't match our habitual story about ourselves. Can we remain open to the possibility that we might be more deserving, more capable, more lovable than our conditioning suggests. Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, can you identify moments when you might have walked away from your own wishing tree? Perhaps a compliment you dismissed, an opportunity you assumed wasn't meant for you, or a moment of joy you cut short because it felt too good to last. What would it mean to trust in your worthiness to receive life's gifts? As the Buddha observed, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The wishing tree's magic isn't diminished by granting wishes, it is fulfilled by them. And our capacity to receive life's blessings isn't diminished by accepting them, it is expanded. Now let us explore a story about recognition and the wisdom hidden in plain sight. This is the lesson of the visitor and the holy man. Word had spread throughout the countryside about a remarkable holy man who possessed extraordinary wisdom and spiritual power. People said he could answer any question, solve any problem, and provide guidance that would transform the most troubled life. He lived, according to these stories, in a simple house high atop a mountain, far from the distractions and corruptions of ordinary village life. A man from the valley below had been struggling with a persistent problem that seemed to have no solution. He had tried everything he could think of, asking friends, seeking advice from local elders, even visiting other teachers. But nothing had brought him the clarity or peace he desperately sought. When he heard about the holy man on the mountain, he knew he had to make the journey, no matter how difficult it might be. The path up the mountain was steep and dangerous. The man climbed for hours under the burning sun, his feet growing sore, his breathing labored, his water supply shrinking, but his determination never wavered. He was certain that once he reached the top and met this legendary figure, all his troubles would be resolved through the holy man's superior wisdom and spiritual insight. Finally, after a hard climb that left him exhausted and dusty, he reached the simple house at the mountain's peak. The structure was humble and weathered, exactly what he had expected for someone who had risen above worldly concerns. He approached the door with a mixture of anticipation and respect, preparing himself to meet someone who possessed wisdom far beyond that of ordinary people. When he knocked, an elderly servant answered. The man was plain and unremarkable, his clothes simple, his manner humble, his appearance entirely ordinary. He looked like any of a dozen servants the visitor might encounter in his own village. "I would like to see the wise holy man," the visitor said, barely glancing at the servant as he spoke. His eyes were already searching past the old man into the house, eager to catch a glimpse of the extraordinary being he had climbed so far to meet. The servant smiled warmly and gestured for him to enter. "Please come inside," he said gently, leading the way through the modest dwelling. As they walked through the house, the visitor looked around eagerly, his heart racing with anticipation. He examined every room they passed, searching for signs of the holy man's presence, perhaps special robes, sacred objects, or a feeling of otherworldly peace. The servant continued to guide him quietly through the simple rooms, past basic furnishings and ordinary household items. Before the visitor quite realized what was happening, they had walked through the entire house and arrived at the back door. The servant opened it and gestured toward the path that led back down the mountain. The visitor stopped abruptly, confusion and disappointment washing over him. "Wait," he said, turning to face the servant with growing frustration. "I didn't come all this way to be escorted through an empty house. I want to see the holy man. Where is he?" The old servant's smile deepened, and his eyes twinkled with gentle amusement. "You already have seen him," he said quietly. "But more importantly, I have a teaching for you that will solve whatever problem brought you here today." The visitor stared at him, not understanding. This ordinary old man couldn't possibly be the legendary holy figure he had heard about. Where was the shining presence, the obvious signs of spiritual achievement, the dramatic wisdom that everyone talked about? "Here is the teaching," the servant continued, his voice soft but carrying absolute conviction. "Everyone you meet in life, even if they appear plain and insignificant to you, see each of them as a wise, holy man or woman. If you can do this, if you can truly see the sacred in every person you encounter, then whatever problem you brought here today will be solved." Buddha's wisdom tells us, if you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. This tale reveals the deep truth that we find what we are prepared to see, and our capacity for recognition determines what wisdom becomes available to us. Why do we search for the sacred in special places and extraordinary people while overlooking the wisdom that surrounds us every day? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioning that associates spiritual truth with dramatic appearances, exotic circumstances, and obviously impressive figures. But the deepest teachings often come disguised as the most ordinary encounters. The visitor's problem wasn't really the external difficulty that brought him to the mountain. His deeper problem was his inability to recognize wisdom when it didn't match his expectations. He was so focused on finding someone who looked like his idea of a holy man that he almost missed the actual holy man standing right in front of him. Consider your own daily interactions. How often do you dismiss people because they don't seem impressive, educated, or obviously wise? The store clerk who greets you with genuine warmth. The janitor who works with quiet dignity. The child who asks innocent but profound questions. Any of these encounters might offer exactly the insight you need if you are prepared to receive it. This teaching transforms how we move through the world. Instead of searching for wisdom in special places or waiting for obviously enlightened teachers to appear, we begin to approach every person as a potential source of insight. The homeless person on the street, the difficult coworker, even the family member who annoys us. Each becomes a teacher when we are ready to learn. Zen master Dōgen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. When we truly see others as sacred, we naturally forget our own ego's need to feel superior or special. The visitor's disappointment came from his attachment to being someone who had access to exclusive wisdom, rather than someone who could recognize wisdom everywhere. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. Every person carries this same capacity to kindle understanding in others, but only when we approach them with the recognition that they might have something valuable to offer." Look deeply at your current relationships and daily encounters. Where might you be overlooking wisdom because it comes in an ordinary package? What would change in your interactions if you truly treated every person as someone who might be a disguised holy man or woman? Tonight, as you consider the various people in your life, family members, colleagues, strangers you encounter, can you practice the holy man's teaching? Can you look past surface appearances and social roles to see the deeper wisdom that every conscious being carries? Can you approach tomorrow's interactions with the recognition that your next teacher might be standing right in front of you waiting to be seen? As the Buddha observed, in the sky there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The distinction between holy and ordinary, wise and simple, teacher and student, exists primarily in our own minds. When we learn to see past these artificial categories, we discover that wisdom is everywhere, waiting patiently for our recognition. Our next story reveals the deep difference between spiritual performance and true understanding. This is the teaching of the head that wished to be severed. In the great monastery of Kao, where hundreds of monks gathered daily for meditation and study, the morning routines followed ancient rhythms. After the pre-dawn sitting, as the first light touched the mountain peaks surrounding the monastery, monks would disperse to their various duties. Some to the gardens, others to the kitchens, still others to copying sacred texts or maintaining the buildings. One particular morning, the venerable Abbot Chao Cho made his customary walk through the monastery grounds, checking on the well-being of his students and the condition of their practice. His presence was both gentle and penetrating. Monks never knew when their most casual words might become profound teachings or when their deepest spiritual insights might be revealed as mere intellectual concepts. As he passed behind the main meditation hall, a building where the community gathered twice daily for silent sitting, the abbot noticed a young monk sitting alone in the shadow of the wooden structure. The monk appeared to be engaged in some form of practice, though he was apart from the scheduled community activities. "Brother," Chao called softly, approaching with the quiet steps that had become second nature through decades of mindful walking. "Where have all the virtuous ones gone?" The question seemed simple enough, almost like casual conversation, but those familiar with Chao Chow's teaching style recognized the subtle depth in his inquiry. Was he asking about physical location, spiritual attainment, or something else entirely? The young monk looked up with an expression of confident understanding. He had been at the monastery for several years and prided himself on grasping the essential points of Zen teaching. This seemed like an opportunity to demonstrate his comprehension of the Dharma. "They have all gone to work," the monk replied matter-of-factly, gesturing toward the various parts of the monastery where his brothers were engaged in their daily tasks. His tone suggested that the answer was obvious. Virtuous people naturally engage in productive activity rather than sitting idle. What happened next shocked the young monk completely. Without warning, Chao reached into the folds of his robe and produced a sharp knife, its blade gleaming in the morning sunlight. But instead of threatening the monk, the abbot did something far more unsettling. With complete calmness, Chao stretched out his own neck, exposing his throat to the blade, and handed the knife to the bewildered young monk. His voice remained gentle and conversational, as if he were making the most reasonable request in the world. "My responsibilities as abbot are many and demanding," he said with apparent sincerity. "I wonder if you could please cut off my head for me. I would be such a help in managing my duties." The young monk's eyes widened in horror. His hands trembled as he stared at the knife now in his possession and the exposed neck of his revered teacher. Everything about the situation contradicted his understanding of proper monastic behavior, spiritual teaching, and basic human decency. Unable to comprehend what was being asked of him or why, unable to see past the literal surface of the abbot's request to any deeper meaning. The terrified monk dropped the knife and ran. His feet carried him far from the meditation hall, far from the incomprehensible scene, his mind reeling with confusion and fear. Cao calmly picked up the fallen knife, tucked it back into his robe, and continued his morning walk with the same peaceful demeanor he had maintained throughout the entire encounter. As the Buddha observed, it is better to travel well than to arrive. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the vast difference between intellectual understanding and genuine realization. Why do we so often mistake conceptual knowledge for authentic wisdom? Zen Buddhism reveals that our thinking mind loves to collect spiritual ideas and organize them into neat categories, creating the illusion of understanding without the transformative experience of direct insight. The young monk's response, "They have all gone to work," represents the kind of dualistic thinking that separates spiritual practice from ordinary activity. His answer implied that virtue lies in doing productive tasks rather than sitting idly, revealing his assumption that awakened activity and rest exist in opposition to each other. But Cao's teaching cuts much deeper than this surface interpretation. By offering his neck to the knife, he was asking a profound question. If the monk truly understood that all the virtuous ones had gone to work, what work was most essential? If responsibility truly mattered, what was the most compassionate response to suffering? Look deeply at your own spiritual assumptions. How often do we divide life into spiritual activities and mundane ones, important work and trivial tasks, sacred moments and ordinary time? This dualistic thinking keeps us from recognizing that every moment offers opportunities for awakened response. The abbot's gesture points toward the heart of Zen understanding. Genuine compassion sometimes requires actions that transcend conventional thinking. When someone is truly suffering under the burden of responsibility, attachment or spiritual seeking itself, what is the most loving response? Sometimes it requires cutting through the very thing that seems most precious. Our concepts, our roles, even our sense of separate self. Zen master Linji taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." This famous saying points to the same radical teaching Chao offered. Any fixed idea about enlightenment, any attachment to spiritual roles or concepts becomes an obstacle to direct realization. True compassion sometimes requires destroying the very thing we think we are trying to protect. The young monk's terror and flight revealed how completely he missed this deeper level of teaching. He remained trapped in literal interpretation, unable to see past the surface of the abbot's words to their transformative invitation. His spiritual understanding, though articulate, remained purely conceptual. Consider your own relationship to spiritual responsibility and helping others. When someone asks for help with their suffering, do we offer concepts and advice, or do we respond from a deeper place of understanding? Are we willing to sacrifice our comfortable spiritual positions to meet others exactly where they are? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between talking about virtue and embodying it. The monk could identify where virtuous people go and what they do. But when faced with an opportunity for radical compassion, he fled. His knowledge remained divorced from spontaneous awakened action. In Zen practice, we cultivate what is called great doubt, a willingness to question even our most cherished spiritual understandings. This doubt isn't negativity, but openness to discoveries that transcend our current conceptual frameworks. Are we prepared to have our spiritual certainties challenged, even destroyed, if it serves awakening? Tonight, as you encounter opportunities to help others with their burdens, can you sense the difference between offering what you think they need and responding from genuine understanding? Can you feel how true compassion sometimes requires cutting through your own comfortable assumptions about what constitutes appropriate spiritual behavior? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "In caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others." The abbot's offer to sacrifice his own head points toward this non-dual understanding. When we truly see interconnection, the boundaries between self and other, helper and helped begin to dissolve into spontaneous compassionate action. Let us now turn to a tale of a young monk who believed he had failed in his spiritual journey. This is the story of the Golden Wake. At a peaceful monastery overlooking a calm mountain lake, a young student sat sadly on the temple steps as the sun began its fall toward the water. His shoulders slumped with the weight of disappointment, and his eyes reflected the heaviness in his heart. For months he had struggled with his studies, unable to grasp the deep teachings that seemed to come so naturally to his fellow monks. "The boat is coming to take me home because I have failed in my studies here at the monastery," he said to his teacher, who had quietly approached and sat beside him. "What can I say to my family? They sent me here with such hope, believing I would return as a learned monk who could guide others on the path." The old teacher gazed out at the lake where a small wooden boat was making its way slowly across the still water. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. "Say that you did your best, and that is as much as anyone can do," he answered gently, his voice carrying the wisdom of many years. "But I wanted to be a famous monk and teach others," the boy replied, his voice thick with disappointment. I dreamed of leading meditation sessions, of having students seek my guidance, of making a real difference in the world. You can, the teacher said simply. How? Asked the sad boy, looking at his teacher with confusion. I couldn't even memorize the basic prayers. I fell asleep during meditation. I failed at everything that matters. The teacher smiled and pointed toward the water. Live from your heart, I will show you. Do you see that boat making its way across the lake with the sun setting behind it? Yes, the boy replied, following his teacher's gaze. Do you see its wake spreading across the lake? See how the boat looks like the tip of a golden triangle as the wake fans out from its front. The boy squinted, trying to see what his teacher described. Sort of squint, said the teacher patiently. That boat is you as you leave the monastery. The lake is your life. The wake is the effect that you will have on the world. Each ripple triggers another ripple which triggers another. Be constantly striving to live as wise and loving a life as you can. You can teach the path of love to everyone you meet simply by being yourself. A few of these people will pass on your good example to others. Thus, the expanding golden wake of good works begets other good works. Most important, notice how each ripple catches the sun and bounces its light back to heaven. The boy watched in wonder as the simple boat continued its journey, the wake indeed forming an ever-widening triangle of light upon the water. Each small wave caught the golden sunlight and reflected it back toward the sky in countless sparkling points. Would you come home with me and explain all of this to my father? Asked the boy, hope beginning to lighten his voice. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. The deeper teaching here shows us that influence spreads not through grand gestures or perfect knowledge, but through the simple truth of a heart committed to goodness. Why do we believe that only formal papers or recognized achievements allow us to make a meaningful impact? Zen Buddhism points to our attachment to outside approval and our misunderstanding of how wisdom actually moves from person to person. We imagine that teaching requires a stage, a title or a certificate, when in reality the most profound lessons are shared through the quality of our presence and the honesty of our actions. Consider how often throughout your day you encounter people who touch your life not through their expertise, but through their kindness, their patience, or their simple human warmth. The grocery store clerk who greets you with genuine care, the stranger who offers directions with a smile, the friend who listens without judgment. These people create ripples that extend far beyond their awareness. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called unconscious teaching. This is the natural sharing that occurs when we align our actions with our deepest values. Like the boat on the lake, we may not see our wake, but it spreads inevitably behind us, touching shores we never knew existed. The Buddha said, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. Each moment of authentic living becomes a teaching. Each act of compassion creates ripples. Each choice to respond with wisdom rather than reactivity sends light back toward heaven. Tonight, as you reflect on your own journey, can you see the golden wake you are already creating? Perhaps it is in the patience you show a difficult family member, the encouragement you offer a struggling colleague, or the simple presence you bring to everyday encounters. The light you reflect may be lighting up paths you have never imagined. Our next story reveals a profound teaching about the nature of emptiness and the surprising places where we discover truth. This is the story of grasping what cannot be held. In a quiet monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted gently on the morning breeze, Master Seo sat with one of his most earnest students. The young monk had been studying Buddhist philosophy for several years, filling his mind with concepts about the nature of reality, the illusion of the self, and the teaching of emptiness that seemed so central to the Buddha's wisdom. He could recite passages about sunyata, discuss the philosophical implications of non-being, and engage in lengthy debates about the relationship between form and void. But for all his intellectual understanding, something felt missing. The words remained just words, concepts floating in his mind without the direct experience that would make them real. He approached his teacher that morning with a question that had been troubling him for months. Master, the young monk said, bowing respectfully, I have studied the teaching of emptiness extensively. I understand that all things arise and pass away, that nothing has permanent independent existence. But I feel like I am only grasping concepts. Can you help me get hold of emptiness itself? Seo looked at his student with knowing eyes. He had seen this struggle many times before. The gap between intellectual understanding and direct realization, the frustration of trying to grasp with the mind what can only be known through experience. Show me how you would get hold of emptiness, the master said simply. The monk thought for a moment, then cupped his hands in the air as if he were trying to capture something invisible. He held his hands carefully as though cradling a soap bubble that might burst at any moment. His face was earnest and concentrated, his entire being focused on this attempt to demonstrate his understanding of a teaching about the very nature of nothingness. There, he said, holding his cupped hands very still. I am trying to hold emptiness itself. Seo looked at the student's empty hands and shook his head gently. That is not very good, he said with a slight smile. You haven't got anything in there at all. You are just holding air and calling it something special. The monk's face fell. He had been so certain that his gesture captured something meaningful about the teaching. Well, master, he said, his voice tinged with disappointment and confusion. Please show me a better way. How does one truly get hold of emptiness? Without warning, Master Seo reached out and grabbed the monk's nose, giving it a sharp, firm yank. The monk yelled, his hands flying to his face, his eyes watering from the sudden unexpected pain. Master, that hurt me. Seo released his grip and smiled broadly. Now that, he said with satisfaction, is how you get hold of emptiness. The monk stood there rubbing his nose, completely bewildered. His nose throbbed with very real, very empty pain. How could this physical sensation, this undeniable presence of discomfort have anything to do with emptiness? It seemed like the opposite of everything he had been studying. But as the initial shock wore off, something began to shift in his understanding. The pain in his nose was absolutely real. Yet, it was also completely temporary. Already beginning to fade, it had arisen from nowhere, would disappear completely and left no permanent mark on reality. It was both utterly present and completely insubstantial. More importantly, in the moment of that sharp sensation, all his conceptual thinking about emptiness had vanished entirely. There had been no philosophical analysis, no abstract understanding, just direct immediate experience. The gap between the one experiencing and the thing experienced had dissolved in the simple reality of Uch. As the Buddha taught, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Here we discover that emptiness is not the absence of experience but the very nature of all experience. Everything arises, exists for a moment and passes away, leaving no permanent trace, while being completely real in its moment of appearing. Why do we struggle so hard to understand emptiness conceptually when it is the very fabric of every moment? Zen Buddhism points to our habit of trying to grasp reality with our thinking minds rather than experiencing it directly. We turn the most immediate truths into abstract philosophies, then wonder why they feel distant and theoretical. The monk's mistake was common and understandable. He was trying to hold emptiness as if it were a thing, an object that could be captured and possessed. But emptiness isn't an object. It is the very condition that allows all objects to appear and disappear. It is not something we can grasp, it is what makes grasping possible. Consider your own experience right now. The thoughts arising in your mind. Where do they come from? Where do they go when they fade? The sensations in your body, the sounds around you, even your sense of being someone who is reading these words, all of it is appearing and disappearing in the space of awareness like clouds in an empty sky. This emptiness isn't blank nothingness. It is alive, responsive, creative, the very capacity for experience itself. When Seo yanked his student's nose, he wasn't demonstrating the absence of sensation, but the miraculous way sensation appears from nowhere, exists vividly, and dissolves back into nowhere, all within the spacious emptiness of awareness. Zen Master Huang Po taught, the foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see. The monk was rejecting his direct experience in favor of his concepts about experience. The master's intervention brought him back to the immediacy of seeing, feeling, and knowing without the filter of philosophical analysis. In our daily lives, we constantly encounter this same teaching. The anger that seems so solid and permanent when we are caught in it. Where does it go when it naturally subsides? The worry that feels so important and real. What is its actual substance when we look closely? Even our sense of being a solid, separate self. Isn't it actually more like a flowing process, a river that appears to be the same while constantly changing? The Buddha said, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. This isn't a philosophical statement, but a direct pointing to what is happening right now. Everything we experience is empty in the sense that it has no permanent independent existence. Yet, it is all perfectly real as it appears. Tonight, as you notice thoughts, sensations, and experiences arising and passing in your awareness, can you sense the emptiness that Seo was pointing to? Not as an abstract concept, but as the very space in which your life is unfolding. Can you feel how this emptiness is not separate from the fullness of your experience, but is its very nature? Buddha's wisdom reminds us in the sky there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The emptiness of all phenomena isn't something we need to achieve or understand. It is what we are, what everything is right now. We just need to stop trying to grasp it and let ourselves be grasped by it instead. Let us now turn to a story about the deceptive nature of appearances with the masks we wear in seeking acceptance. This is the tale of the hungry abbot and the generous robe. In a busy merchant quarter of an ancient Chinese city, where silk traders and wealthy families built fancy houses behind high walls, there lived a man whose wealth was known throughout the region. His mansion boasted carved jade doorways, courtyards filled with exotic birds, and servants who attended to every detail of daily life. This man took great pride in his position and was particular about maintaining his reputation among other prominent citizens. One morning, as autumn rain fell steadily on the cobblestone streets, a figure approached his fancy front gate. The visitor was a Zen abbot from a mountain monastery, but he appeared as nothing more than a beggar. His simple brown robes were patched and worn thin from years of use. His sandals were cracked and muddy from walking mountain paths, and his wooden begging bowl showed the stains and scratches of countless meals received in charity. The abbot stood quietly at the gate, rain dripping from his shaved head, and waited with the patient dignity that comes from years of spiritual practice. When the gatekeeper finally noticed him, the man's expression immediately showed scorn. "What do you want, beggar?" the gatekeeper asked harshly, not bothering to bow or show any respect. "This is the house of an important man. We have no scraps for wanderers." "I am traveling and seeking food," the abbot replied gently. "Perhaps your master would offer a simple meal to a monk." The gatekeeper looked him up and down with obvious scorn. These ragged clothes, this worn appearance. Clearly, this was just another vagrant trying to take advantage of his master's household. "Begone," he commanded. "My master does not waste food on beggars. Seek your charity elsewhere." The abbot accepted this rejection without anger or argument. He simply bowed, turned, and walked back into the rain, his empty bowl tucked beneath his arm. Several hours later, as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, the same figure returned to the same gate. But now everything had changed. The abbot wore his formal ceremonial robes, rich golden silk embroidered with intricate patterns, a magnificent purple sash across his shoulders, and prayer beads carved from precious wood. His bearing remained humble, but his appearance now spoke unmistakably of high spiritual rank and monastery wealth. This time, when the gatekeeper saw him approaching, his entire demeanor transformed. "Welcome, honored master," he exclaimed, bowing deeply. Please enter. My master will be so pleased to receive such a distinguished visitor." The rich man himself hurried out to greet the abbot personally, offering elaborate bows and flowery words of welcome. "Venerable sir, what an honor for our humble household. You must join us for our finest meal. Please allow us to serve you." They ushered the abbot into their most elegant dining room, where servants quickly prepared a huge feast. Delicate fish, perfectly seasoned vegetables, fragrant rice, and sweet desserts filled the low table. The rich man sat opposite the abbot, beaming with pride at his ability to host such an important religious figure. As the first course was served, the abbot did something completely unexpected. Instead of eating, he carefully removed his beautiful ceremonial robe and folded it with great attention. Then, with deliberate precision, he placed the folded robe directly in front of the feast as if it were the honored guest. Standing up with quiet dignity, the abbot spoke clearly so all present could hear. "This meal is not for me. It is for the robe." Without another word, he walked out of the house, leaving behind both the magnificent feast and the rich man's stunned realization of his own shallow judgment. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, judge not by appearances. A rich heart may be under a poor coat. Here we discover how our focus on external appearances creates barriers to genuine human connection and spiritual understanding. Why do we judge others so quickly based on their clothing, status symbols, or outward presentation? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioned mind's habit of creating categories and ranks based on surface appearances. This mental shortcut allows us to feel we understand people without the more challenging work of seeing their true nature. The rich man's household represents a pattern we all recognize in ourselves. How differently do we treat the well-dressed stranger versus the poorly dressed one? How does our attention change when someone mentions their impressive job title versus their humble occupation? How does our respect shift when we learn someone's wealth or poverty? This ancient wisdom illuminates our tendency to project worth onto external symbols rather than recognizing the inherent dignity of every person. The abbot remained exactly the same person in both encounters, his wisdom, compassion, and spiritual realization unchanged by his clothing. Yet the household's treatment of him transformed completely based solely on appearances. Look deeply at your own patterns of judgment. Perhaps you find yourself making assumptions about people in expensive cars versus old vehicles, designer clothes versus thrift store finds, prestigious addresses versus modest neighborhoods. Each of these judgments reveals how we have been conditioned to equate external appearance with internal worth. The story points us towards a fundamental question about authenticity. If we receive a different treatment based on our presentation, which version of ourselves is real? Are we the person in casual clothes running errands, or the person dressed professionally for important meetings? Are we the one seeking help or the one offering it? In Zen practice, we cultivate what is called original face, the authentic self that exists beneath all roles, costumes, and presentations. This original face doesn't change whether we are wearing rags or ceremonial robes. Whether others treat us with respect or dismissal, Zen master taught, your original face is not born and does not die. This teaching invites us to recognize that our essential nature, our capacity for awareness, love, and wisdom remains constant regardless of how others perceive us or how we present ourselves to the world. The abbot's teaching was not just for the rich man, but for all of us who might witness his story. By feeding the robe instead of himself, he revealed how often we relate to people's personas rather than their essence. We honor the title, the clothing, the symbols of status while missing the actual human being present before us. Consider how this insight might transform your daily interactions. The server at your restaurant, the clerk at the store, the person asking for directions. Each carries the same essential dignity as the most honored guest. The challenge is seeing past the uniforms, the circumstances, the social roles to the original face beneath. This doesn't mean we ignore practical realities or social conventions, but that we hold them more lightly. We can acknowledge someone's professional role while remembering their fundamental humanity. We can dress appropriately for occasions while knowing our worth doesn't depend on our wardrobe. Tonight, as you consider the various roles and presentations you inhabit throughout the day, can you sense the unchanging awareness that witnesses all these temporary costumes? Can you feel the original face that remains constant whether others see you as important or invisible? The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The abbot's silent gesture spoke more powerfully than lengthy sermons about equality and compassion. By walking away from the feast prepared for his appearance rather than his essence, he offered a teaching that continues to resonate across centuries. Let us now turn to a tale that reveals how deeply our ego can hide even from ourselves. This is the story of the Prime Minister's lesson. In the grand capital of the Tang dynasty, where golden palaces rose toward heaven and scholars debated philosophy in moonlit gardens, there lived a man of extraordinary accomplishments. The Prime Minister had earned his position through brilliance in both government and military strategy, defending the empire from invaders while crafting policies that brought prosperity to millions. His name was spoken with reverence throughout the land and his counsel was sought by the emperor himself. Yet despite his worldly success, the Prime Minister considered himself a humble student of the Buddha's teachings. Each week, he would leave behind the silk robes and ceremonial duties of his office, donning simple clothes to visit his beloved Zen master in a modest temple on the outskirts of the city. There, surrounded by weathered wooden beams and the gentle sound of wind chimes, he would sit in meditation and receive instruction like any other sincere seeker. The relationship between the two men appeared beautifully balanced. The master treated his distinguished student with neither special deference nor dismissal, and the Prime Minister seemed to approach his teacher with genuine humility and respect. To observers, it appeared that political rank had no bearing on their spiritual connection, simply a wise teacher guiding an earnest student along the path of awakening. On one particular autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted past the temple windows, the Prime Minister settled into his usual position before his master. After their customary meditation, he posed a question that had been troubling him. "Your Reverence," he began with careful formality, "I have been contemplating the nature of spiritual obstacles. Could you please explain what egotism means according to Buddhist teaching?" The transformation in the master's demeanor was startling and immediate. His face flushed deep red, his eyes flashed with apparent anger, and in a voice dripping with condescension and contempt, he snapped back harshly. "What kind of stupid question is that? Have you learned nothing in all your visits here?" The Prime Minister recoiled as if physically struck. Never had his teacher spoken to him with such disrespect. His own face grew hot with indignation. How dare this simple monk who had never governed provinces or led armies speak to him in such a manner? Did he not understand to whom he was speaking? The Prime Minister's jaw tightened, his hands clenched, and his entire body bristled with wounded pride and rising fury. Then, just as suddenly as the storm had begun, the master's expression softened into a gentle smile. His voice returned to its usual warm, patient tone as he said quietly, "This, Your Excellency, is egotism." Buddha's wisdom reminds us the ego is a veil between humans and God. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the subtlety and persistence of our false sense of self. Even when we believe we have cultivated humility, the ego remains waiting for the right trigger to reveal its hidden presence. Why do we struggle to see our own egotism? Zen Buddhism teaches that the ego is like our own shadow, always present but rarely noticed because we are looking in the wrong direction. The ego is particularly clever at disguising itself in spiritual clothing. We can practice meditation for years, study sacred texts, and even develop genuine compassion, all while maintaining a subtle sense of spiritual superiority or specialness. The Prime Minister's ego wasn't obvious in his daily spiritual practice. He appeared humble, respectful, and sincere. But when his dignity was challenged, when his sense of status and importance was threatened, the ego erupted with full force. This is the ego's signature. It reveals itself not in our calm moments, but in our reactive ones. Consider how often throughout your day you might experience similar moments. A colleague interrupts you during a meeting and irritation flashes through your mind. A driver cuts you off in traffic and anger arises. Someone questions your expertise in an area you consider your specialty and defensiveness emerges. These automatic reactions reveal the ego's constant vigilance, always ready to defend its constructed image of who we think we are. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are." and you can use a little improvement. This paradox points to the heart of working with ego. We must simultaneously accept ourselves completely while remaining willing to see through our self-deceptions. The ego thrives on both self-hatred and self-aggrandizement, but it dissolves in the light of honest, compassionate self-observation. The Master's skillful teaching method reveals another crucial insight. Sometimes the most effective spiritual instruction comes not through gentle guidance, but through direct confrontation with our unconscious patterns. The shock of having his dignity challenged in such an unexpected way created a moment of clarity for the Prime Minister. A sudden recognition of patterns that had been operating below the surface of his awareness. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called ego transparency, the ability to see through our self-protective mechanisms as they arise. This doesn't mean we eliminate the ego entirely, which would be neither possible nor desirable, but rather that we develop a lighter relationship with it. We learn to recognize its voice without automatically believing its stories. Tonight, as you notice moments of defensiveness, irritation, or wounded pride arising in your interactions, can you remember the Prime Minister's lesson? Can you see these reactions not as character flaws, but as opportunities for deeper self-understanding? As the Buddha taught, you only lose what you cling to. The ego is simply another thing we cling to, a collection of stories about who we think we are. In releasing our grip on these stories, we discover the freedom that lies beyond the prison of self-importance. Tonight, as we bring our shared journey to a gentle close, can you sense how the peace you have experienced isn't something separate or distant, but instead something always within your reach? Can you feel that the profound stillness you have touched tonight lives not just in these stories, but in your own present awareness, quietly awaiting your recognition? The Buddha taught us all that we are as the result of what we have thought. With our thoughts we make the world. Reflecting on this insight, remember that peace and clarity do not depend on external circumstances or special states, but blossom from within your own heart and mind, accessible in every moment. Throughout tonight's journey, each story has offered a timeless lesson, pointing repeatedly to the same transformative truth that suffering eases when we soften our grip. That inner freedom arises naturally when we release our attachments, and that true peace emerges from seeing clearly beyond illusions and reactions. Even if your mind occasionally drifts, even if restlessness resurfaces, the wisdom you have absorbed tonight is now deeply planted in the soil of your consciousness, ready to support you whenever needed. Consider as you prepare to rest that these ancient teachings have illuminated not a distant path, but a way of being fully present right here, right now. In the quiet moments that follow, allow yourself to feel how deeply your awareness has shifted, how naturally your breath now flows, and how gently your heart rests untroubled and open. These teachings are reminders that true wisdom is not hidden on mountaintops, nor locked away in sacred texts. It shines brightly and unmistakably in the ordinary simplicity of mindful awareness. Tonight you have glimpsed that truth, a truth that the Buddha himself affirmed when he taught. 3 things cannot remain long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. As you move from this peaceful space back into your daily life, carry with you not only the stories themselves, but the profound calm and insight they have kindled within you. May this inner peace serve as your steady companion, illuminating your way through both bright and challenging moments alike. Thank you sincerely for sharing this journey with us. May your rest tonight be restorative and deep, nourishing you fully and awakening you refreshed and ready to greet the morning with renewed clarity, compassion, and joy. Until our paths meet again, may your heart remain open, your mind remain clear, and your spirit continue to grow strong, guided gently by the timeless wisdom of Zen.